Before we dive into setting up Ghost in this course, I just want to take you on a quick tour of the default network that gets set up when you create a new AWS account. It's called a Virtual Private Cloud, or VPC for short. So let's go over and click on Services and scroll down to Network and Content Delivery, and then click on VPC. We're not going to cover networking too much in this course, but sometimes you might get weird errors or things might not work right, and often it's because something got messed up in your network settings. So you can use this video as a reference to come back to if you need to start from scratch and see how the default network looks at first creation. A VPC is a virtual private cloud or a virtual network. And VPCs are a regional resource. The default in the US is the Ohio region, and that's fine for our purposes. So I just want to show you each of the different pieces of this because our Ghost server and database are going to live in this private network. So first is just the VPC itself. So if you click on your VPCs, you can see over here that I've got a VPC over here, and the important things are the ID, which you don't have to memorize. AWS will auto-populate for you. And then also this IPv4, what's called a CIDR block. This is just the addresses of the network. And so you can see they're in the 172.31.00 IP address block. So then under the VPC, there are a number of different pieces that make up the network. The first one I want to show you are the subnets. Subnets are sort of like cordoned off sections of the network, and you can see that they have their own sections of the IP addresses. One thing that's important to know about subnets is that they can be in different availability zones in AWS. A zone is kind of like a data center. You can kind of think of it like a data center in that they have their own separate power and networking and things like that. So it's very unlikely that multiple availability zones will go down at once. So this is important. It comes back up when we are going to get into RDS and our database, because RDS requires you to have the database in at least 2 subnets that are in 2 availability zones. So luckily, the default network that AWS provides does this for us. The next thing I want to show you is the internet gateway. So that by default, a private network can't actually access the internet, and you need this thing called an internet gateway to let you do that. Now, what's nice is that you can always click on this little info box to give you a better definition of what each of these things are. This networking stuff is probably, in my opinion, the most difficult thing as a developer trying to learn AWS, because I don't have a background in networking. And so these little definitions really come in handy. So we have this internet gateway, and you can see that it has this attached state, and it's attached to our VPC. And this means that our VPC will be able to access the internet. Well, more accurately, things on our VPC will be able to access the internet. The next thing I want to show you is the route tables. So if you go over here to this route table, a route table contains a set of rules called routes that are used to determine where network traffic from your subnet or gateway is directed. So this is the main route table. The main route table automatically comes with the VPC, and it controls the routing for all the subnets that aren't explicitly associated with any other route table. And since we only have one, they're all 3 associated with this one. If I scroll down, you can see all 3 of these subnets here. Now, if I look over in the summary and go back to the routes, you can see this destination of 0.0.0/0, which basically just means all IPv4 addresses. So basically, this is just saying that all of this traffic is being routed through. You can see our internet gateway, and so all of the traffic is going to go through the internet gateway, and all 3 of our subnets are associated with it. Okay, the last thing I want to show you is what's called a network ACL. An ACL is this is an access control list, and if I click on this, this just is a way, it's an optional security layer for your VPC that acts as a firewall for controlling traffic in and out of one or more of the subnets. So right now, this is just the default, so it's allowing basically all traffic. So these are the different components of the default VPC, the default virtual network that AWS gives you. And this will work for us as we set up Ghost. But if you've been doing a lot of tutorials or messing around in your AWS account, you might have inadvertently deleted these things or reset some of the settings. So this is just a clean slate to show you what everything will look like by default so that you can set up Ghost without having any sort of networking issues. We're going to be setting up Ghost with Node on a Linux server. So the next step that we need to take is to actually create that server using AWS EC2. EC2 stands for Elastic Compute Cloud. We can either click on it here in recently visited services, or if you don't have that there, go up to services, and right up here at the top is compute, and you can click on EC2. Now you launch EC2 in regions, so I'm currently in the Ohio region, and that's going to be perfectly fine for us. EC2 instances are kind of like virtual servers. They have a template basically that gives us all of the memory and things that we need to do things like install Node or install a reverse proxy like nginx. So to get started, we just need to click this big orange button for launch instance. We can click launch instance again here. And there are a few choices that we need to make. The first one is the Amazon Machine Image, or AMI. This is the template for the operating system and things like that. We're going to be using Ubuntu, so I'm going to scroll down to Ubuntu Server 20.04. And notice this free tier eligible. This is going to be important for us. We're going to always want to make sure we're using any of the free tier levels so you don't get charged a bunch of money for any of these things. So go ahead and select this. Next, we need to choose an instance type. This basically refers to the amount of computing power. So AWS has all these different types of computers that you can basically rent out from them, and they vary in their processor speed and memory and things like that. For this tutorial, we're just going to use the T2 Micro. This is a free tier eligible, and this is just a baseline, simple general purpose computer that we can use to host our node server, which is going to run Ghost. So we're going to leave this as is, and we could actually go to review and launch, but we are going to look at some of these other details that we're going to check out here. So click on next, configure instance details. We're actually going to leave all of these as the defaults, but notice here our VPC, that is the default VPC set up in this region. So we're going to leave that. And we're also going to leave this auto-assign public IP. This ends up being useful later on. We're going to leave this as the default setting, which is to enable the public IP. These other options all relate to various behaviors you can do to keep your system running at different times or to monitor the system. We're going to leave all of these off because most of them incur additional charges and we just don't need them. But if you're using this in the real world at some point, you're probably going to want to look through these options, and you could make your system very robust and powerful. So I'm going to go ahead and leave all these as the defaults. Let's go ahead and look at the storage. We're going to leave this as the default as well, but I just want to show you this system. So we have 8 gigabytes here by default in an SSD, and that's going to be plenty for what we're trying to do, just installing Ghost. The next section is the tag section. This is useful because in the real world, you're going to end up having a lot of these different instances. And so you might want to have some sort of tag that lets you know the purpose of the instance. So let's go ahead and let's go ahead and add a name tag. And I'm just going to say Ghost Server. And then I'm going to go to the security group. We're going to create a new security group. A security group is kind of a group of rules that's going to control the traffic for our instance. And this is important. So I'm going to go ahead and rename this security group to Ghost Security Group just to make this easy for us. And I'll change the description to be Ghost Security Group. And we need to do a couple of things here. One thing we need to do is create a rule for SSH, which we have by default here, but instead of having this custom, it's saying 0.0.0/0. That means all traffic. So anybody on the internet could SSH into this instance, and we don't want that. Instead, we want to just set this to our own IP address. AWS provides an option for that. So let's go ahead and select my IP. And of course, my IP is going to be different than your IP. And then we also need to open up the ports for HTTP and HTTPS, since that's what Ghost will be using. Now, we're not going to set up HTTPS in this course, but we'll go ahead and open up the port in case you want to do that as well. So I'm going to go ahead and add a rule here and scroll down here to HTTP. AWS will go ahead and populate that. And notice that we have this 0.0 again. This is what we want. This is all of the IPv4 IP addresses. So we're opening up that. This ::/0, this is the notation for IPv6, which is a different protocol. But it's the equivalent basically of saying all traffic. And notice that this is on port 80. This is where by default all web traffic will go as port 80. Let's do the same thing for HTTPS. I'm going to add a rule and then scroll down to HTTPS. HTTPS is in port 443. And you can see here that we're doing the same thing where we're opening up all of the traffic to HTTPS. And this is what will let Ghost communicate with the outside internet. Okay, so this is the instance. Let's go ahead and go to review and launch. And all of this looks good. We have our Ubuntu server with our T2 micro. We've got our security group set up with our protocols, and everything is looking good. I'm going to go ahead and click launch. And there's one additional step that we're going to need to do. We're going to need to create a key pair, a public and private key that we're going to use to SSH into the server. So if you're on an existing AWS account, you might have an existing key pair. I'm in a brand new account here, so I don't have one. So let's go ahead and do create new key pair. I'm going to call this key pair ghost key. And what happens here is you just download this key pair and a download will start, and it's going to be this .pem file. It doesn't matter where you keep this file. You just want to make sure you know where it is, because you're going to need to, when we actually log into the server using our terminal, we're going to need that private key in order to get in. It's going to match the key with our IP address. Okay, and with that, we can go ahead and do launch instances, and we're going to let that spin up. And then let's go ahead and click on this instance ID here, and it takes us over to our instances. Notice that this is highlighted over here. This is our EC2 dashboard, and we have our instances, and you can see that our instance is already up and running. And if I click on it, I can see a bunch more information about it, and you can see that I have both a public IP address and a private IP address. So that's how we can create and launch our EC2 instance that will run our Ghost server. Okay, so we got our server set up, our instance of EC2 that's going to host the node server that Ghost is going to run on. But we also need a database. Ghost uses a relational database. That's something like SQL, instead of something like MongoDB, which is a non-relational or NoSQL database. So for AWS, relational databases are done through RDS, Relational Database Service. You can see I've got it here in my recently visited services. You might not have that, so you can go over to Services, open that up, and down here we have a database section, and there's many different options at AWS. We're going to use RDS, which is Relational Database Service. And so once that loads, you'll see this dashboard here, and we're going to click this big orange button for Create Database. And go ahead and X out of this. Now, I'm going to go through the standard creation process, even though we're going to use a lot of the default settings here. We're going to be using MySQL. And the reason I know this is because if we go over to the Ghost installation docs, let me zoom out of this a little bit. If you look on here and scroll down for prerequisites, you can see Ubuntu, the different versions. We just set up an EC2 instance with Ubuntu 20.04. And you can see here MySQL 5.7 or 8.0. And these versions are important because there are different features in different versions. So we're going to use MySQL 8.0 or whatever the latest version of MySQL 8 is. So we'll click on MySQL, we'll scroll down, and then here's the really important thing if you don't want to get charged a bunch of money. If you have access to the free tier, make sure you select the free tier option here. And that way you're not going to get charged for this. If your account is old enough to where you don't have access to the free tier, you're going to want to make sure you use dev and test. But if you scroll down to the bottom, you're going to see this charge. Now, this won't charge immediately. This will charge after the month of usage. So as long as you remember to delete this database instance after you're done with this course, then you won't get charged very much. But if you do have access to the free tier, I highly recommend going ahead and just using the free tier for this. So we need to name our database. Let's just call it Ghost Database. We also need some credentials for this. Now, in the real world, you're going to want to do a lot of things to make this really secure. For our purposes, I'm going to make these easy to remember. So I'm going to change this admin to ghost admin. And for the master password, I'm going to make it really simple and just type ghost db admin, ghost db admin. Now, the one thing you want to make sure of here is you want to avoid special characters in this master password. It already tells you that you can't use things like slashes or single quotes or double quotes. I'm going to also recommend, at least for this demo, but also just for this installation process, that you avoid things like exclamation points. We're going to need to type this password into the terminal when we set up Ghost, and terminals have a lot of special characters, and so I've run into a lot of installation problems when I've had super complicated passwords for this. So keep it something simple that you can remember, because we're going to need it in a little bit. Now, scrolling down, we're just going to leave all of these the same, but feel free to look through these. We're going to use a regular DB instance class. You can always click on these info boxes to bring up more information about what these things mean. Since we're doing a demo, we don't really care too much about the storage or auto scaling, things like that, but we can leave all these things as is since we're using the free tier. If you had a real application that you needed to make sure you had enough storage and you needed to make sure that it automatically increased in storage as you went on, you could mess with these settings. We're also going to leave the availability and durability the same. Now for connectivity, we have our default VPC, so we're going to leave that. We're going to leave it in the defaults. The only thing that we need is this public access set to yes. And this is the way that we're going to let our EC2 instance connect to the database. We're also going to create a new VPC security group for our database, and let's just call it Ghost DB. And we can leave our availability zone to no preference. And then we'll leave all these as the defaults. You can see here that for estimated monthly costs, because I'm in the free tier, there's no estimated monthly cost. So I'm going to go ahead and create database here and let that run. And it usually takes a few minutes to run, so we'll let that set up. While you're waiting, you can also look at the credential details. And that way you can just copy the username and password so that you can access it later. Okay, I'm just going to fast forward this so you don't have to sit here and watch it. So after several minutes, you should see that the database has been successfully created. We've got our database set up, and now we just need to make sure that our EC2 instance, where we're going to be running Node, is able to talk to our database. So to do that, we're going to click into our database here. We're going to scroll down here to where this security section is. You can see I'm in this connectivity and security area. So we're going to click on the security group here. And then once that loads, we can scroll down. Well, let's actually pull this up to make it easier to see and scroll down a little bit. We want this inbound rules section. So click on that. And we want to edit our inbound rules. You can see here there's already one for MySQL for my IP address. But we want to edit inbound rules because what we want to do is add in the security group for our EC2 instance. So you can see here I've got this MySQL for port 3306. That's what we want. But we also want the security group that we created for our Ghost server. So if I just start typing in Ghost, you can see here I've got this Ghost security group. So I can click that and go ahead and click Save Rules. And now that's going to allow, you can see here it's listed in our inbound rules, it's going to allow anything in that Ghost security group to access our database through port 3306. And the only thing right now that's in that Ghost security group is our EC2 instance. And that's basically it. That's all we need to do to open up that port of communication between our EC2 server and our RDS database. We've got our database set up and our EC2 instance launched. So now we need to actually SSH log into our server so we can start installing some software to get Ghost up and running. So let's go back over to our EC2 instance. So I'll click over into EC2, click into instances, and you can see our Ghost server here. So let's go ahead and click into that. Now, AWS provides some handy instructions for us on how we can connect to our server here. So I can click on Connect, and you can see there's 3 options here: Instance Connect, Session Manager, and SSH Client. We're going to use an SSH client here. And what we'll need to do is find our private key file and modify the permissions, and then just connect to our server. So I'm going to go ahead and copy over just this long command here. And notice one thing, this 3-22 all the way to 223, this is actually the public IP address of our EC2 instance. And you can see that it's kind of inserted here into this address for our EC2 instance. So I'm going to hop back over to our terminal. And I've got my private key over in this dev directory here. So the first thing we need to do is make sure that our key has the right permissions. We want to turn on read permissions for our user, but turn off everybody else's permissions. We don't want anybody to be able to read, write, or execute this file. So we can do that with chmod and then 400, and then the name of the file, which is ghostkey.pem. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter there. That'll update those permissions. And now I'm just going to go ahead and paste our SSH command into the terminal. Now what's happening here is we're doing this SSH and we're specifying the key that we want to be able to use. And then we're specifying the address that we want to SSH into. So I'll go ahead and hit enter. Now, the first time you do this, you're probably going to see a prompt asking you to add this to a list of places that you can SSH into. So go ahead and hit yes if you see that. But you can see now that I'm actually in the server. If I scroll up a bit, you can see this welcome to Ubuntu message. And you can see we have some updates that need to happen, and we'll do that shortly. But this is how you actually log into the server. You're actually in the EC2 instance right now, logged in. Okay, we are logged into our EC2 server, and we need to make some updates. But before we do that, we need to create a new user for Ghost. It's really a best practice to not do things as the root account if you can help it. You want to create, even if it's just a super user admin account like we're about to make, but it's different than the root account. So let's go ahead and do that. First, let's clear this out. So I'm just going to write clear this out, and I'm going to type sudo add user, and I'm just going to call this user ghost-admin, and just give it a password that you can remember. I'm going to make this super easy to remember for me. You can always change it later, and you can just kind of skip all of these. This is just Ubuntu asking you for information about this person, which is not actually a person. So I'm going to type yes, and now we have our user. Now we need to add our user to the sudo super user group. And we can do this with something called user mod. So I'm going to say sudo user mod, and we're going to give it 2 flags. We're going to say -a, which means append, and capital G, which means group. So add this to the following group. And we're going to say sudo or sudo, depending on how you want to say it. So we're going to add this user to the group, and then we specify the user, which is ghost-admin. So modify the user, add ghost-admin to the sudo group, and hit enter. Great, so now that's done. Now we're going to go ahead and log in as our ghost-admin user. So we can use the su or switch user command, and then a hyphen, and then ghost-admin. And that's going to let us switch over. Now we need to enter that password that we created, so I'm just going to type that in really quick, and now we're logged in. If I clear this out, you can see the ghost-admin there at the front of the prompt. So now we're ready to actually do our updates to our server just to make sure we're on the latest and greatest versions of everything. So we need to do 2 commands for that, but we can put them in one line. So we're going to say sudo apt-get update. This is just going to update the package lists for packages that need upgrading, as well as new packages that have come to the repositories. And then we're going to do our double ampersand, and we're going to say sudo apt-get upgrade, which is actually going to fetch the new versions of the packages and do those updates. And we just need to enter our password in for the ghost admin account, and it's going to go grab those updates. Once the updates have been grabbed, it's going to ask me if I want to continue. You'll see it uses a whopping 929 kilobytes of space. So I'll go ahead and hit yes, and it will start to install all of those updates. Now this might take a few minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and fast forward this so you don't have to sit here and watch it. And now all of our updates are installed and we're ready to go. Okay, we are ready to install a couple of prerequisites for Ghost onto our EC2 instance. So the first one we're going to install is called nginx, and nginx is a reverse proxy. Basically what this means is that it's going to take any connections that come to our server trying to hit port 80, which is sort of the standard port for basic websites, and it's going to route it over to the port that Ghost is running on. So let's do that first. We're going to hop over to our terminal. Now I'm already logged into our EC2 instance using our SSH private key, and I've already switched over to the Ghost admin user. And you can do that in case you forget with su hyphen and then Ghost admin, and it'll prompt you for the password. So I'm already logged in though. So I'm going to go ahead and run sudo apt-get install nginx and let that run. It only takes a second. You do have to confirm. Great, and let me clear that out. And then we just need to allow nginx to control that traffic. So we need to set up our firewall in our Ubuntu server to allow that. So luckily there's just one command that we need. It's sudo and then ufw. That stands for uncomplicated firewall. And it has a number of different settings. We're going to say allow and then single quote capital nginx and then capital F full. And this is just a preset that will allow full privileges for nginx. And we'll link to some resources that you can read more about this. But sudo ufw allow nginx full. We'll go ahead and hit enter. And you can see this rules updated result. Okay, so we've got one of our prerequisites done. The next prerequisite we're going to want to install is NVM, the node version manager. So let's hop back over to the browser. And I've got the NVM repository open here. What we want to do is scroll down and click on this install and update script. And we're going to use the wget. It doesn't really matter which one you use. We're going to use the wget script. We're just going to copy that over. And let's hop back over to our server in the terminal and paste that in. So what we're doing here is we're going and getting the raw install script and we're piping it into bash. So we're going to go ahead and hit enter. And now that's done. So now what we need to do is refresh our session here with our Ghost admin account. So what we need to do is, let's go ahead and clear this out so you can see better. And we're going to hit exit, and that's going to return us back to our root user, our Ubuntu user. And then we just need to switch back into our Ghost admin account. So su-ghost-admin. It'll prompt you for the password, so type that in. And now we're back up and running. And we can check that this was correctly installed. We can say command-v nvm, and it'll echo that back out to us. Command-v will echo out how the shell will interpret a command that you're giving it. And we can see here that it's going to call the nvm command when we pass it nvm. It's just a good way to check that something exists. Let's also install the latest LTS version of Node. So we can say nvm install, and then pass the flag of LTS. So we're just going to say --LTS. And that's just going to tell NVM to install the latest version. At the time of this recording, it's version 14.15.5. And that's also going to alias it to default. Great. And now if we do node-v, which is the version, we're going to see 14.15.5. So now we're ready to install Ghost. Luckily, we don't have to actually configure nginx. Ghost is going to do that for us. But then Ghost is going to run on Node, so we needed Node to move forward. We're ready to install the Ghost CLI, which is a handy tool for installing and running Ghost. So we can do that with npm. We can just say npm i-g for global, and then ghost-cli. Notice here that I'm already logged into our EC2 server with SSH, and I've already switched over to the Ghost admin account. So let's let that run. I'll go ahead and fast forward so you don't have to sit here, and it's done. And we can make sure that it's installed correctly by running ghost help. And you can see that the ghost help outputs all of its options. So let's clear that out. Before we actually install Ghost itself and run it, we need to create a directory that our Ghost server will live in. So we can do that with sudo make directory, and we're going to pass it the -p flag. That's just going to create subdirectories if they don't exist. And we're going to put this in /var/www/ghost. And you're going to need to enter the password for the admin. Great. Now we need to change the owner and the group for that directory. So we're going to say sudo chown, which stands for change owner. This command first takes a user, which will be ghost-admin, followed by a colon, and then the group, which we also made ghost-admin, and then the name of the directory. So /var/www/ghost. Great. And then lastly, we just need to change the permissions. So we're going to say sudo chmod to change permissions. And we're going to type 775. Now what this means is that we're going to give the user read, write, and execute permissions. That's what the 7 means. We're going to do the same thing for the group, read, write, and execute. That's also what the 7 means. And then 5 is going to stand for read and execute, and that's for other. So for everybody else, they can only read and execute. And we'll add some links alongside the video so you can learn about chown and chmod. And then we just type in the directory again, so /var/www/ghost. And that's done. Let's just lastly cd into that. So cd/var/www/ghost. And now we are actually ready to install Ghost. We're ready to install Ghost and get it up and running on our EC2 instance. In order to do that, we're going to use one big command with a bunch of configuration in it. So you're going to need to gather a couple of pieces of information and have them ready for when you're entering that command. The first thing you're going to need is the EC2 public IP address. So go over to EC2, click on Instances. Let's move this down a little bit. Select your Ghost server and grab this public IP address. And you're going to want to paste it into something like Notepad or Drafts or something like that. The next thing you're going to need is the database information. You should have your credentials from a previous video saved somewhere, so go ahead and grab those. You're also going to need the connection strings. If we go over to our console home here, click on RDS. You could also get to RDS by opening up the services menu and going to RDS there. Wait for RDS to load and then head over to DB instances. Click on your database. And you can see we've got this endpoint here. This is the endpoint that you're going to need. So copy that over, put that in the same spot that you're keeping your public IP address. So you're going to need the connection string, the user, password, and database name, and also the public IP address for this command. So gather all those up in one place, and then let's head over to the terminal. So in the terminal, you can see that I am in our Ghost directory that we created, and I'm logged in as Ghost admin. Let me just clear this out. And we're going to do a quite long command here, so just bear with me. So we're going to say ghost install, and we're going to use these slashes to let us get onto new lines without actually executing the command. So I'm going to do this slash and hit enter. That's going to give me a new line. So I'm going to say --db equals MySQL, another slash. Then we're going to say db host equals, and this is going to be our connection string to RDS. So grab that and then paste that in. Now, before you hit enter, add another slash. It's always very tempting to hit that enter right after you paste something. It's just kind of muscle memory at that point. So add another slash, hit enter again. Do another flag, db user. So in mine, I set it up for Ghost admin. And this is why in that previous video, I talked about special characters, because this can get really weird as you're trying to enter in this command for the installation process if you have a bunch of special characters. So add another slash, hit enter, db pass equals, and I just made it really simple, and this is a very insecure password, but for now it's okay. We can always change it later. Add another slash, hit enter, and then do --db name and put in the name of your database. I had done ghost-database. And then double check all that, make sure it's right, and go ahead and hit enter. And the Ghost CLI will start doing its thing. It's going to check all of the prerequisites. It's going to make sure that it can connect to the database. It's going to do a whole bunch of things for you. The Ghost CLI is really nice. It used to be you had to do all of this stuff manually. It was quite a process. So it's pretty awesome now that you can just do this in a single command. Even when you're not installing the database locally, you're actually connecting to another database somewhere else, like we're doing with RDS. So let's let that install. Once it finishes downloading and installing Ghost, it's going to walk you through this wizard here. And this is where you need the public IP address for your EC2 instance. So we're going to type in, and this is very important, add the http://. Don't just type in the numbers for the IP address. And the IP address for my EC2 instance, which will be different than yours, is 18.188.240.246. And then hit enter. We have to add the sudo password here. Now, I can't scroll to make this a little bit easier to see, but the next question is, do you wish to set up nginx? We want to say yes for that. It's going to tell us that SSL certs cannot be generated for IP addresses, and it's going to skip that. That is totally normal because we're not using a custom domain with HTTPS. The next question is, do you want to set up systemd? Systemd is a standard process for controlling what programs run when a Linux system boots up. So we want to say yes because we want Ghost to run every time this machine is started up. And then lastly, it's going to ask us if we want to start Ghost. We'll go ahead and say yes to that. That's going to start up Ghost for us. And now you can see we get this nice message that says Ghost was installed successfully. And to complete the process of setting up the actual blog, we could go over to this IP address. Just for the sake of gratification, let's go ahead and copy that over, head over to the browser, and open a new tab, paste that in. And you can see we've done it. We've actually installed Ghost and can set up a blog with Ghost running on our EC2 instance and our RDS instance. Congratulations. I'll leave you to actually walk through the setup process with Ghost since it'll be specific to however you want to use it. But what's cool is that as you're going through this process, it's actually going to be creating and modifying tables and entries on your RDS database. So you should feel pretty great about the fact that you've started this from scratch and gotten all the way through to being able to use a UI to modify an RDS database. Well, we made it to the Ghost setup wizard. That means we've successfully installed Ghost on our server and it's connecting to our database. And if we wanted to, we could go ahead and walk through the account creation process and actually get our Ghost site up and running. I'm going to let you do that since this is your Ghost instance, but I want to leave you with some resources on where to go next and some places that you might need to troubleshoot down the road. The two most common things that you're going to want to do in order to actually get this out into production is change the database information to be more secure and also change over to a custom domain. Now, to do this, your best option is to use the Ghost CLI. The Ghost CLI will let you do all this kinds of thing just by using commands. You can configure nginx, you can update your database information, and there's a whole reference here that you can use. There's a Ghost setup command that is actually what got run during the installation process. You can actually tap into that and run it anytime you want to do things like update the database information to a more secure password or update nginx for setting up a custom domain. So always go to the Ghost CLI docs first before you try to do anything, because Ghost will almost certainly have something in the CLI that will make your life easier. But sometimes you do need to get into the actual underlying file structure and tinker around with things. So I do want to show you two things before we go. So let's hop back over to the terminal. And the first thing that you're going to want to look at sometimes is the configuration file. So if I just do a list of this directory here, you can see we have this config.production.json. If I look in that config.production with Vim, you can see we have our URL. We also have all of our database information. So you could just manually change this information here. You might not want to do that. You might just want to use the Ghost CLI to actually update that for you. But if things are going wrong, you may need to tap into this file and mess around with some things. So that's the first go-to spot for troubleshooting. The other one is the nginx configuration. So I just want to show you that. If I cd over to /etc/nginx and list that out, you can see a number of different folders here. The one that we're concerned about is sites enabled. So let's change directory into sites enabled and list that out. You can see that we have a configuration file that matches our IP address. So if I read that one out with Vim, you can see here that we've got our server name, which is our public IP address for our EC2 instance, and some configuration for Ghost here that's going to basically hand off port 2368 over to port 80. Now, again, Ghost should be able to modify this kind of thing for you, but notice that we've got our IP address for our EC2 instance tied to all of our configuration for the rest of Ghost. So if we were to ever to stop our EC2 instance and reboot it, it might break our configuration here since we're just depending on this hard-coded IP address. So in order to take this to production, you're going to want to set up a custom domain and use the Ghost CLI to actually configure everything accordingly. So I just wanted to leave you with that because I didn't want you to get super frustrated. As soon as your IP address changed, I didn't want you to get mad at this tutorial and think that everything was broken. It is actually possible to change this, and you're going to use the CLI and these couple of files, and you'll be good to go. But thanks again for watching this course, and I hope you learned a lot and had a great time.